The Kingdom of Ndongo, formerly known as Dongo or Angola, was an early modern African state located in what is now Angola. The Kingdom of Ndongo is first recorded in the 16th century. It was one of a number of vassal states to Kongo that existed in the region, though Ndongo was the most powerful of these, with a king called the Ngola. Little is known of the kingdom in the early 16th century. Angola was listed among the titles of the King of Kongo in 1535, so it is likely that it was in somewhat subordinate to Kongo. Its own oral traditions, collected in the late 16th century, particularly by the Jesuit Balthazar Barrera, described the founder of the kingdom, Ngola.Little, also known as Ngola, as a migrant from Congo, but the head of a Kimbundu-speaking ethnic group. Social and political structure. The Kimbundu-speaking region was known as the Land of Mbundu, and according to late 16th century accounts, it was divided into 736 small political units ruled by sobas. These sobas and the territories were compact groupings of villages surrounding a small central town. These political units were often grouped into larger units called kanda and sometimes provinces. Larger kingdoms may have emerged in earlier times, but in the 16th century most of these regions had been united by the rulers of Ndongo. Ndongo's capital city was called Kabasa, located on the highlands near modern-day Ngola.Little. This was a large town, holding as many as 50,000 people in its densely populated district. The king of Ndongo and the leaders of the various provinces ruled with a council of powerful nobles, the Makota, and had an administration headed by the Tendala, a judicial figure, and the Golambal, a military leader. In Ndongo itself, the ruler had an even larger group of bureaucrats, including a quartermaster called Kilanda and another similar official called the Mpanekadia. Social structure was anchored on the Anamurindra free commoners. In addition to the commoners, there were two servile groups, the Ajuko and free commoners who were permanently attached to the land as serfs, and the Abaka, saleable slaves. Rise of Ndongo. The Kingdom of Ndongo was a tributary to the Kingdom of Kongo along with various other polities outside of Kongo proper. The Mbundu in the south and Kongo in the north were always at odds. The Kongo managed to exact tribute from these states since before the coming of the Portuguese. Seeds of independence. In 1518 the Kingdom of Ndongo sent an embassy to Portugal asking for missionaries and for recognition as independent of Kongo. A Portuguese mission arrived in Ndongo in 1520, but local disputes and perhaps Kongo pressure forced the missionaries to withdraw. Afonso I of Kongo took the missionaries to Kongo and left his own priest in Ndongo. Around 1556 Ndongo sent another mission to Portugal seeking military assistance and offering to be baptized, even though Portuguese officials at the time doubted the religious sincerity. Indiana 1901. East. G. Ravenstein claimed that this mission was the result of a war between Kongo and Ndongo, in which Ndongo won and claimed its independence, which was subsequently repeated by Jan Vencina in 1966 and then others, but this appears to have been a misreading of the original sources. Ndongo may well have seen the mission as a sort of declaration of independence, since Kongo's response to the 1518 mission suggests that it still maintained sufficient control to prevent it being an independent move. In any case, the second Portuguese mission arrived at the mouth of the Kwanza in 1560, headed by Paulo Diaz de Nove, grandson of the famous explorer Bartolomeu Diaz, and including several Jesuit priests including Francisco de Gouveia. This mission also failed and Diaz de Nove returned to Portugal in 1564, leaving Gouveia behind. the Portuguese colony of Angola. By the time of the Third Mission in 1571, the King of Portugal Sebastian I had decided to charge Diaz de Nove with the conquest and subjugation of the Kingdom of Angola, authorizing him to govern the region, bring in settlers, and build forts. Diaz de Nove arrived in Luanda by arrangement with Kongo's King Alvaro I in recompense for Portugal's assistance against the Jaga. Unable to conquer any territory on his own, Diaz de Nove made alliances with both Kongo and Ndongo, serving as a mercenary army. The First Portuguese Ndongo War. In 1579, Portuguese merchants who had settled in Kongo, led by Francisco Barbuda, advised Ngola Ndambi Colombo Kiakasenda that Portugal intended to take over his country. Acting on this intelligence and advice, Ngola Ndambi tricked the Portuguese forces into an ambush and massacred them at his capital. The war that followed witnessed a Kongo invasion which was narrowly defeated in 1580, and a Portuguese offensive up the Kwanza River, resulting in the founding of the fort at Masingano in 1582. A number of Sobas switched their allegiance to Portugal, and soon many of the coastal provinces were joined to the colony. By 1590, the Portuguese decided to attack the core of Ndongo and sent an army against Cabata itself. Ndongo, however, had recently sealed an alliance with nearby Matamba, and the Portuguese force was crushed. Following this defeat, Ndongo made a counter-offensive, and many of the formerly pro-Portuguese Sobas returned to Ndongo, but Portugal managed to retain much of the land they had gained in the earlier wars, and in 1599, Portugal and Ndongo formalized the border. The Mbangala period. During the early 17th century, an uneasy peace held between Portugal and Ndongo. Portuguese continued their expansion along the Kwanza, founding the Presidio of Kambamba in 1602, and attempted, whenever possible, to meddle in Ndongo's politics, especially as it concerned Ndongo's tenuous hold on Kisama and other lands south of the Kwanza River. In the course of their activities in the region south of the Kwanza, the Portuguese came into contact with the Mbangala, a ruthless group of nomadic raiders who were ravaging the country. In 1615, the temporary Angolan governor Bento Bana Cardoso encouraged some Mbangala to cross the river and enter Portuguese service, and with the help he expanded the colony along the Lucala River, north of Ndongo. In 1617, the new governor Luís Mendes de Vasconcelos, after first rejecting the use of Mbangala troops, committed himself to the alliance and began aggressive campaigns against Ndongo. Thanks to the help of Mbangala bands commanded by Kasanya, Kasa and others, he was able to invade Ndongo, sack the capital and force King Ngola Mbandi to take refuge on the island of Ndongo in the Kwanza River. Thousands of Ndongo subjects were taken prisoner, and Mendes de Vasconcelos sought unsuccessfully to create a puppet government to allow Portuguese rule. Mendes de Vasconcelos' successors, João Correia de Sousa, tried to make a peace with Ndongo, and in 1621, Ngola Mbandi sent his sister, Nzinga Mbandi, to Luanda to negotiate on his behalf. She negotiated a peace treaty in which Portugal agreed to withdraw its advance fort of Ambaca on the Lucala, which had served as a base for the invasion of Ndongo, return a large number of captive Ijiko to Ndongo, and forced the Mbangala bands who were still ravaging Ndongo to leave. In exchange, Ngola Mbandi would leave the island and re-establish himself at the capital and become a Portuguese vassal, paying 100 slaves per year as tribute. However, João Correia de Sousa became involved in a disastrous war with Kongo and in the aftermath was expelled from the colony by angry citizens. His temporary successor, the bishop, was unable to execute the treaty, and it was then left to the new governor, Fernão de Sousa, to settle matters when he came in 1624. The rise of Queen Nzinga, Portugal's failure to honor its treaty, took a toll on Ngola Mbandi, and in desperation, he committed suicide, leaving the country in the hands of his sister Nzinga, who was to serve as regent for his minor son, then in the protective custody of the Mbangala leader Kaza, who had left Portuguese service and joined with Ndongo. Nzinga, however, only briefly served as regent, and had the young son murdered and succeeded to the throne as ruling queen. Father Giovanni took this opportunity to reopen negotiations with Nzinga, whose legitimacy he questioned. He refused to return the Ijuko, and insisted that Nzinga first acknowledge Portuguese sovereignty. Although Nzinga was prepared to do this, she would not leave the island until her full control was established and the Ijuko returned. When the Portuguese refused, Nzinga encouraged them to run away and enter her service. The dispute over the Ijuko led to war in 1626, and Sousa's army was able to oust Nzinga from Kidonga, but not to capture her. Sousa felt confident enough at this point to declare Nzinga deposed and convened some Sobas who had supported her to re-elect as new King Hari A. Kiluanji, lord of the rocky fortress of Impungo Ndongo in 1626, but he died in the smallpox epidemic that broke out as a result of the war, and was replaced by Felipe Hari Ngola. Nzinga refused to recognize Hari Ngola, claiming that he was of slave origin and not eligible to reign. She reoccupied Kidonga and began mobilizing support of all the Sobas opposed to Hari in Angola and Portuguese rule, leading to a second war with Portugal. Sousa's army defeated Nzinga again in 1628, once again forcing her to flee the islands. Nzinga narrowly escaped capture, at one point having to descend into the Bakes on ropes with only a few hundred of her followers remaining. Desperate, Nzinga joined her forces with the Mbangala band of Kasanya, who forced her to accept a humiliating position as wife and give up her royal regalia. Nevertheless, she was able to win one of his supporters, subsequently known as Nzinga Mona, away and rebuild her army. Using this support, Nzinga moved northward and captured the kingdom of Matamba, which became her base, even as she sent a detachment to reoccupy the Kidonga Islands, now sacred because her brother's remains were buried there. At this point, the history of Nzinga became that of Matamba, and her career can be followed in that country. Ndongo under Felipe Hari Ndongo's dynasty. Felipe I served the Portuguese loyally in the following decades, even when the Portuguese made a separate peace with Nzinga in 1639. His troops were the largest component in the army the Portuguese used to make conquests and to consolidate the rule in the Dembos area to the north. When the Dutch invaded Brazil, Felipe served against them, forming the bulk of the forces that defended the rump colony at Masangano, though he suffered a crushing defeat at the hands of Nzinga's army with its Dutch allies in 1647 at the Battle of Combi. Following the expulsion of the Dutch, however, Felipe began to feel that the Portuguese were not giving him his full due. He became involved in disputes with them over his subordinates and jurisdiction, even as his forces marched into disastrous wars in Kisama and the Dembos. His son and successor was equally disappointed, especially following the Portuguese treaty with Ndongo, which recognized Nzinga as Queen of Ndongo and Matamba in 1657, leaving him feeling dishonored as only ruler of Pungo Ndongo. In 1670, therefore, he revolted, and after a long siege, his fortress fell to the Portuguese army in 1671, thus effectively ending Ndongo as an independent kingdom.